Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek are both being charged with conspiracy to murder. The Crown is accusing the two men of conspiring to murder police officers during their time protesting at the 2022 Coutts protest and blockade. They're also being charged with unlawful possession of a firearm for a dangerous purpose, mischief over $5,000. Anthony Olenek is additionally charged with unlawful possession of an explosive device for a dangerous purpose. The two men have pled not guilty to all of the charges. The 2022 Coutts protest and blockade, much like the Freedom Convoy that took place at essentially the same time, was a peaceful and civilly disobedient demonstration, a protest against what I refer to as the COVID-19 enterprise, this governmental apparatus of surveillance and control, complete with edicts, mandates, and orders that were marketed to all of us as public health measures to reduce COVID-19 transmission. The judge in the trial for Chris Carbert and Anthony Olenek essentially rebuked Olenek's defense attorney, Marilyn Burns, in instructions to the jury today during proceedings. He said there was no evidence of a political aspect driving this trial. Robert Krejcik reporting for Rebel News here in Lethbridge, Alberta. I want to share a quote with you folks made by Justice David LeBrenz during today's proceedings, the judge presiding over this trial. Quote, "There is no evidence that either the police or the Crown or the court has been acting under the influence of the political sphere." He added, "The court, the executive, and the legislative branches are separate." That's essentially a rejection of one of the core themes and messages that were expressed in Marilyn Burns' opening statement that she made yesterday, in which she described the trial as political. She said, quote, "It is a political criminal trial," and she also described it as, quote, "un-Canadian." LeBrenz described Marilyn Burns' characterization of the trial. I'll share a quote with you. Quote, "Ms. Burns stated that, for example, this is a truly political trial that is un-Canadian. She also suggested that the police were acting under the orders of politicians. LeBrenz stated there is no evidence of this being the case, and he directed jurors to dismiss with that characterization and said they're simply there to do one thing: execute the dispensation of justice. LeBrenz also instructed jurors that statements made by lawyers, either the prosecutors or defense attorneys, do not constitute evidence unto themselves. Here's a quote. "It is important to remind you what counsel states in its opening address is not evidence. The evidence consists solely of the evidence you hear from the witnesses that testify, exhibits that are filed, and agreed statements of fact." Here's a quote from LeBrenz. "I will also caution you that some of the language may have been interpreted by you as a concession of the existence of a conspiracy or some concession of guilt." He added, quote, "There are no concessions." He was advising jurors to make sure that nothing said by Marilyn Burns would be seen again as speaking on behalf of Olenek, and he was sort of anticipating some possible interpretations of that opening statement and making sure that jurors, again, do not make any inference that somehow she is speaking on behalf of both defendants because she only speaks for one. LeBrenz also reiterated, he emphasized the presumption of innocence when issuing his directive to the jurors. He reminded them that the standard for conviction is beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they have some sort of doubt when it comes to who to believe between different versions of events, they must acquit, because that sort of doubt in and of itself doesn't meet that threshold, that standard of beyond a reasonable doubt, which is what's required to get convictions on any of the charges against the two defendants. One small little detail about my journalistic project here today is that I submitted this form to have an evidentiary exhibit released to me for the purposes of journalism, publication, reporting, and it was approved. Specifically, I requested this exhibit, which includes a series of phone calls that were intercepted and recorded by the RCMP as part of its investigation of the Coutts protest and blockade, and these phone calls involve the two defendants. And rather than just relay those conversations to you secondhand through my recollection of it or transcription of them, I'd like you folks to hear those conversations for yourselves. Make up your own minds whether or not they're important in one regard or the other. So I'll probably get them on Monday, and we'll include them in a future report to be published very soon. Producing this original in the field, on the ground journalism isn't free. We have operational costs, which is where our dear audience comes in. And of course, that's you. Your donations, your contributions help keep this engine going, because unlike the so-called mainstream media, we're not getting handouts from the federal government to toe the government line. So please visit truckertrial.com, donate, and stay up to date with our ongoing coverage.